Hi, I'm Edward Funk, and this is podcast number 71, um, titled Loretta Young Marries Tom Lewis. Both were duplicitous from the start. Now, I always feel the need to point out those pictures. Uh, it's an attempt subliminally for you to go to Amazon and order one or more of my books. Well, we'll see how it works. Okay, podcast number 71. Okay, when we left off on podcast 70, Loretta was having second thoughts about her engagement to Tom Lewis. Remember, this was another long distance romance, and as we know from a previous podcast, her engagement to Bill Buckner, he ended up being a crook. Loretta planned to attend a New Year's Eve party at Myron Selznick's chalet at Lake Arrowhead, and if we recall, he was her agent. She recalled, I was packing to go, and Tom called from New York and said, I'm coming out. I said, oh, well, that's too bad because I'm going to be away for New Year's Eve. He asked, well, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Myron's in the mountains. And he said, well, I'll be at the Hotel Marmont in case you want to reach me. I said, fine. Anyway, I didn't get back until Tuesday, and he was leaving on Wednesday. And so he called me on Tuesday night and said, I cannot get over you. I said, why? He said, I thought you were going to call me on New Year's Eve. I said, no, I told you I was going to be at Myron's. I didn't say I'd call you on New Year's Eve. He said, well, I just assumed you would. Perhaps I shouldn't have. From that point on, he took an entirely different attitude towards me. Now it was, oh, whatever you want to do. And he simply ingratiated himself right back into my life and into our engagement. Really, I think what actually turned me around was a letter I received from Mama, who was in Mexico City. So we talked about in podcast 70. She was loosely engaged to Tom Lewis, and then he kind of made a big ass out of himself. And she said, "Well, let's give this more thought. Um, let's back off on this for a while." But at this point, he's ingratiated himself back into her life. So I'll probably repeat myself, but really, I think what actually turned me around was the letter I received from Mama, who was in Mexico City. She was on a buying trip for antiques and had been away for about 6 months. She liked Tom very much because he was a Catholic and a very likable man. And she was so afraid that I'd go to marry one of those poor acting fellows who had been married 3 or 4 times before, and I'd be excommunicated by the church. I'd written to her and told her that I'd broken my engagement to Tom. I had said, I don't know why, except I'm just not sure. It wasn't characteristic for Mama to write a letter. When she'd write, it was a very clipped little thing. This time she wrote a long letter back and said, I'm going to presume to do something which I probably shouldn't do, but I'm going to tell you this story. I was engaged to a man before I met your father, and I should have married him. He was a wonderful man for all the right reasons. But I met your father, and your father swept me off my feet. There was nothing wrong with Earl, that's Loretta's father, except that he was a charmer and wonderful looking, and he just loved the women, and the women loved him, and he couldn't leave them alone. I should have married the other man. If I had been more mature, I would have. She continued, I feel the same way about Tom Lewis. He is solid, and he says that and the other. She wrote over 10 pages, and it made sense as she always did. Again, that's Loretta's summary. Loretta reconsidered and concluded Tom would take good care of me and have a good, solid life and be happy as a wife and mother. The wedding day, August 1st, 1940, arrived. The only member of Tom's family to fly out for the wedding was his brother Charles, who acted as best man. Now, Dr. Charles Lewis was chief of staff of a hospital in Troy. Charles had always had some reservations about the marriage. Loretta recounted a conversation that took place between the two brothers at the time of their engagement that Tom would relay years later to Loretta. But Charles had said, Tom, I like Loretta very much, but can you handle a movie star? She will get all the attention. Can you handle that? My voice again. This was a pivotal question, and the answer was that Tom's ego couldn't really stand Loretta getting all the attention, as we will see time and time again in future podcasts. Now, the ceremony was actually held at a priest's rectory in St. Paul's Apostle in Westwood. The Los Angeles Times reported that 3,000 fans stood out to get a glimpse of Loretta. 4 women fainted in all the excitement, and it took 5 policemen to clear a path for the newlywed couples to depart the rectory. It was in the early morning hours of the following day when Tom and Loretta flew to Mexico for their honeymoon. Loretta remembered looking at Tom as he fell asleep in the seat next to her. She said, I asked myself, what do I really know about this man? It was just a brief thought that came over me. My main feeling was that he was perfectly cast as Mama had observed in her letter. He was 10 years older. He's a practicing Catholic, not in my business, but in radio. And yes, I was in love with him. It was easy for me to believe I married him for all the right reasons. Now, they would spend a whole month honeymooning in Mexico. Irene, who we know from as a movie designer, she designed a lot of movies. I'm just going to say something, but we get into the story. Had designed marvelous trousseau, in addition to Loretta's wedding dress. So there were lots of suitcases traveling from one destination to the next. Loretta was very popular in Mexico City, particularly after the movie Ramona. They attended the bullfights in Mexico City, and Loretta was invited to throw the corsage to the matador. Loretta recalled, right after I did that, the whole stadium went wild, and a crowd started moving towards our box. Immediately, a wall of policemen strategically gathered around us, and Tom just loved all the attention. The newlyweds settled in New York City to start everyday married life. Loretta recalled, we took quite a large apartment at the Marguerite on Park Avenue. It had a living room, a dining room, 3 bedrooms, and 3 bathrooms. Once they were settled in their new apartment, Loretta arranged for Judy and Judy's governess, Miss Shanky, to join the household. Loretta recalled, one night after they arrived, Tom and I had gone to the theater with some friends. There wasn't a trace of snow going in, but when we came out, it was just like fairyland. I'd never seen snow falling, and everything was so white and pure. After we got home, I went to the window and just there gazing. Tom woke Judy and brought her in. He said, Judy, your mother is so impressed with this. I thought you would be too. Isn't that beautiful? She was only 5 at the time, but she was thrilled to death. I love Tom all the more for wanting her to share that lovely moment with us. Now, these are very happy days. The future of her career as an actress was in an arbitrary stage of ambiguity for both Tom and Loretta. Would she continue her acting career, or would she be the Manhattan wife of radio executive Tom Lewis? Could she have it all and do both? Now, this is telling. The subject had never been discussed prior to their marriage. This allowed both of them to position themselves to get what they wanted without disturbing any illusions. Loretta recalled, I went to New York because that's where Tom's job was. In the back of my mind, I thought, fine, this is where I'll go. This won't last because I know that if I'm not working, money wouldn't be coming in fast enough. How was he going to pay for that apartment, my clothes, our entertainment, and Judy's schooling? Tom was equally duplicitous. He had sent Loretta house hunting in Los Angeles before they were married. Loretta recalled, I called and told him I found a house on Cabinet Street. Well, that's in the flat section of Beverly Hills, which probably is a needless thing for me to just add. And that, anyway, that Loretta's mother could decorate. Um, and so Loretta said, it's $10,000. Do you want it? He said, fine, buy it. And I think the $10,000 was his entire savings. Then I put $60,000 more into redoing it. The ratio of how much each invested reflected their individual earning power at that time. Time was in the $30,000 range, certainly respectable for 1940, but dwarfed by the $250,000 that Loretta was making annually. By having that house in addition to the apartment in New York, Time was able to lock into a working movie star wife and at the same time be able to say, well, my work is in New York. The issue was settled quite simply when Loretta was offered a movie titled The Men in Her Life, a picture about the rigors of a ballet dancer and her love life along the way. Now, I have to say something about that. Loretta had that in her own library. And so I took it home to my apartment and watched it. And the next day she asked me, what did I think of it? I said, well, really, it was kind of boring. And she just kind of looked at me, then she laughed. Again, I don't think too many people were that honest with her or had been for decades before that in her life. Okay, so she's going to do The Men in Her Life. Tom's response was, well, obviously you have to go home to do the picture. I'll come out when I can. The project offered the opportunity to fill Loretta's childhood dream of being a ballerina. She started practicing 12 hours a day with an instructor from the American Ballet who came to their apartment every day for 2 months. Think about what we learned in these last 2 paragraphs. This really wasn't a marriage based on honesty, more of how a man and a woman could manipulate each other to get what they wanted. We'll continue with that theme in the next podcast. Thanks so much.